This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brooks Jensen, Anacortes, Washington. Master and Man by Leo Tolstoy. Section 10. Just before morning, Nikita awoke. It was the frost making its way down his back which aroused him. He had just been dreaming that he was driving from the mill with a load of his master's flour, and that, instead of taking the bridge over the stream, he went by the ford and stuck fast. He could see himself getting under the load and trying to lift it as he straightened his back. Yet, strange to say, the load would not move, but clung always to his back, so that he could neither move the cart nor withdraw himself from beneath it. It seemed to be breaking his very loins, and how cold it felt! At all costs he must get away from beneath it. " Hold on," he found himself saying to the someone who was causing the load to break his back. " Take off some of the sacks." Yet the load kept growing colder and colder, and pressing more and more heavily upon him. Then suddenly something gave a loud bang, and he became fully awake and remembered all that had happened. That chilly load, it was his dead frozen master. That loud bang, it had been caused by Brownie striking his hoofs against the sledge. " Andreyevich! Andreyevich! " he cried cautiously to his master, though he half guessed the truth already, as he raised his back stiffly. But Andreyevich returned no answer, while his body and legs were cold and stiff and heavy as weights. " There is no doubt that he is dead," thought Nikita. He turned his head round, pushed the snow away from in front of his face, and opened his eyes. It was quite light now. The wind was still humming through the shafts, and the snow streaming down, but with this difference, that the snow was no longer dashing itself against the sides of the sledge, but piling itself up in silence over sledge and cob, from the latter of which not even the sound of breathing was now to be heard. Brownie, too, must be frozen, thought Nikita, and indeed those 2 loud hoof-strokes upon the sledge which had wakened him had been the last efforts of the now dead and frozen animal to keep upon his legs. " O God, little Father of ours, surely thou wilt call me also," said Nikita, " and if so, thy will be done. It would be hard that the 2 of us should be taken and the other left. Let death come when it will." And he drew his hand in again, closed his eyes, and fell asleep, firmly convinced that this time he was really and truly dead. It was about the time of the midday meal next day when some muzhiks dug out Vasili and Nikita 70 yards only from the road and half a verst from the village. The snow had drifted completely over the sledge, but the shafts with the handkerchief on them were still visible. Brownie, belly deep in the snow, stood a white frozen mass, his dead muzzle pressed tightly inwards against his rigid neck, his nostrils fringed with icicles, and his eyes coated over and glazed with ice as with frozen tears. Moreover, he had so wasted away in that one night that there remained of him but skin and bones. As for Vasili, he too was stiff as a frozen carcass, and when his legs were pulled aside, the corpse rolled off Nikita in a solid lump. His prominent hawk-like eyes were frozen hard, and his mouth, open a little under his cropped moustache, filled with snow. Nikita only was alive, though frostbitten all over. Yet when brought to himself he could not be persuaded that he was not dead, and that all that was now happening to him was not taking place in the next world instead of this. Indeed, his first feeling when he heard the muzhiks shouting above him as they dug out the sledge and then rolled the stiffened Vasili off him was one of surprise that muzhiks shouted in the next world even as they had shouted in this, and had similar bodies. When at length he understood that he was really here in this present world, he felt vexed rather than pleased, especially as he could feel that the fingers of both his hands were frostbitten. For about 2 months he lay in hospital. 3 of his fingers had to be amputated, but the others healed, so that he was able to go to work again and to live 20 years longer, first as a laborer, then, in his old age, as a watchman. Indeed, he died only this year, at home and under the icons, with a lighted wax candle in his hands, just as he had always wished. Before his death he took leave of his old wife and pardoned her for the cooper. He took leave also of his son and grandchildren, and died thoroughly happy to think that his death left his son and daughter-in-law freed from the burden of having a supernumerary mouth to feed, and that this time he himself would really pass from a life which had grown wearisome to him to that other life which had been growing more and more familiar and alluring to him each year and hour. Is he better or worse off now where he has awakened after his death, the death which really came that time? Is he disillusioned, or has he really found what he expected? Soon we shall all know. This ends Section 10, and ends the book, Master and Man, by Leo Tolstoy.